thank you very much for coming. I'm Matt Wells from The Guardian, and despite what Peter Horrocks was saying to me earlier on, I'm going to be an entirely impartial chair. This evening's debate is, well, I might have a few opinions. It's all right to be, you can be both fair and opinionated. Seats at the front. Do come there. This evening's debate is titled TV Journalism in the 21st Century, The Real Golden Age. Now, is my microphone not working?
It's working, it just needs to go.
It's a bit high, newspaper journalist.
There we are.
Is that all right? Can you hear me? Anyway, what I was saying was, people at the front heard it, you might not feel at the back, is that we're talking about a real golden age, asking the question if this is a real golden age in television journalism, which might kind of seem like an odd premise when the focus of so much debate is on the demise of journalism. But, I mean, I think if you measure it, at least in terms of content, there's more of it than ever. 24-hour news firmly embedded in Europe and the United States, massive growth in the Middle East and Asia. So, and then if you expand the definition to video journalism, it's one of the fastest growing mediums online. At The Guardian, for example, video journalism, video is our most valuable advertising stream in terms of at least cost per multiple. So we thought it would be a good idea to have this positive premise for one of these debates for a change. Although I suppose it wouldn't be journalism if we don't manage to inject a note of cynicism or exaggerate the crisis at some point. For example, I thought a very interesting point that Peter Horrocks made in his speech last night, which we'll talk about, is that the number of world powers investing in international TV services is growing, Russia and China, for example. What implications does this have for democracy and diplomacy? So we have an excellent panel to debate all of this. Peter Horrocks, on my far left, is director of the BBC's Global News Division, and he's responsible for the corporation's international news services across all media. Fortunately for Peter, he hasn't been made forcibly redundant today.
Yes, I'm keeping an eye on Peter, just in case.
Keep it on. Ben Cohen, on my far right, is the technology correspondent for Channel 4 News, and in the previous guise, he's been an internet entrepreneur, all sorts of other interesting things, and now a commentator as a journalist. On my near left, Greg Beitchman is the global editor of Reuters, is that right? Where he's been responsible for transforming its media business from, it says here, a single content source into a multimedia content platform with a range of commercial models. You can tell us what that means later.
Get into it,
yeah. Simon Bucks, on my near right, is an associate editor. Is associate editor at Sky News, where you've been responsible for all sorts of innovations, including reconstructions of the Hutton inquiry and the Michael Jackson trial. Great panel. As usual at these events, there'll be plenty of opportunity to ask questions, so please be thinking about what you might like to ask as we go along. But I thought we'd start with a general one. Perhaps you could all address the title of the debate, maybe with some reference to your own area of expertise. So, Peter, could you start from where you're standing? Do you see it as a golden age for TV journalism?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a golden age, but I think that the decline of television news, which had been predicted very widely 5 or 10 years ago, hasn't happened as rapidly as we might have expected. I think it's in a strong and healthy position in the UK. I think probably quite a lot of the debate about the position of TV journalism is driven by what's happened in the US, where the nightly newses clearly have declined pretty rapidly, and the significance that they had, the investment they can have in journalism, particularly in international journalism, has declined markedly. But around the world, as you indicated, television news is strong, both in terms of continuous news, but also bulletin services as well. And I think in the UK, although clearly there has been some erosion and there's been a change in the balance of delivery, I think that television news journalism still remains remarkably strong. The BBC's predictions about how bulletin audiences might decline have not proved true, and the bulletins are...
Your own internal predictions?
Yes, 5 or 10 years ago we were looking at it and we were expecting a more significant shift towards on-demand, a kind of rebalancing. What's happened is that on-demand has grown, but the bulletins still remain strong. There's still a reference point for at least a large part of the audience, and that's helped by competition with ITV. in continuous news. I mean, clearly led by Sky initially, but with the BBC kind of coming into it, I think there's strong competition there, and that's still delivering large audiences. We saw what happened during the course of the election, and in analytical programmes, Channel 4 and Newsnight again still seem remarkably strong. So I think across the sector, it's not a sort of zero-sum game. The rise of internet journalism or digital journalism does not automatically mean that TV news is declining. Are there things that we need to talk about and work through in terms of quality and range? Yes, but the overall health, I would say, of the ecology is strong in the UK.
OK, well, we'll come and talk about the quality and range issues and online versus traditional platforms in a moment. Ben, from your perspective as a technology journalist, you must be looking at, at all of these issues. Do you share Peter Horrocks' sort of
yeah, more or less. I mean, when I joined Channel 4 News, which was 4 years ago, I was constantly being told by the cameraman that I was certainly not living in the golden age of journalism, of television journalism, the days of the ITN helicopter team and ludicrous expenses and multiple people working on a particular piece. Certainly not the era of a producer being sent out with a camera who also then voices the piece and edits the piece together. And we were living, I felt, in the time, like 6-7 years ago, in the time when text seemed really important, and I was consuming my media through, or my news media, not through television news, but through reading things on the BBC News website or the Guardian website. But then, in the last year, I think that whole thing has fundamentally changed. You've obviously got the impact of iPlayer, but you've got the iPhone, the iPad, tablet computing, and explosion in online video, which means that it's not quite the same television journalism, but if you redefine what television is, and if it's on-demand media, it's embedded media, like we've now done on the Channel 4 News website plug, so you can now look at it on an iPad, that's television news. It's not the traditional bulletin. As a consumer, and as someone who's 28, I don't actually have time to sit down and watch a bulletin anymore, but I do watch a Channel 4 News piece on the web, I'll watch a Newsnight piece on the web, and I'll watch a bit of This Week or something on the web. Redefine what television is, and maybe redefine what news is, which I think has happened. So exposure of news-related programmes and discussions. Well, I think that we're sort of living in a new golden age, but it's really different. And sometimes I do wish, oh God, I wish I was a correspondent back in whenever, in the days even when I was a kid in the 80s, when we sat down as a family and watched news at 10, ITN News at 10 every night. And so did 17 million or whatever other people. That must have been the golden age, but it's different now.
But I suppose at Reuters, you're actually part of forcing this kind of change, aren't you? Because you're certainly at the heart of the change in online and digital video journalism.
I mean, well, I'm going to agree closely. I think to say that it's the golden age of, I think it may well be the golden age of television journalism. It's certainly not the golden age of the television bulletin. Maybe that's where I'm going to go. So I think the idea that you consume content in different ways, whether it's via an iPad, whether it's on a mobile phone, video content's out there, and it's an important language to comprehend the news. And I think that is only going to increase in expense. So the opportunities for television journalists are likely to increase as your sort of opportunity to distribute grows with the new platforms. I mean, as far as what we're doing, I mean, we're really, in many ways, chained to the market. I mean, we syndicate video content, we sell globally, and we're engaged in many different kinds of relationships, whether it's sort of in the US with US broadcasters who are seeing huge challenges in being linear bulletin broadcasters and moving into opinion, or whether it's working with China or India, where the broadcast market and broadcast businesses are ascendant, and people are really looking for training and sort of development of broadcast cultures. We want to accommodate all of that, and I think that's part of what we're trying to do is build a new technology platform that allows, whether you're kind of a broadcaster and you need new kinds of services from Reuters, or you want to access all sorts of content as a web publisher, we want to be able to enable all those kinds of transactions.
Simon, at Sky, as Peter kindly acknowledged, you were the first to air in the 24-hour news market in Britain. So you're seen as kind of at the forefront of all sort of developments and change. How do you see it from your point of view at the moment? Is 24-hour news where it's at, or is it online? What?
Okay, I mean, fascinated to hear what Ben says that he watched News 10 in the 80s. When he was watching it, I was producing it. And let me tell you, Ben, it was not a golden age of television news. You know, we had very heavy equipment. The technology was primitive. It was very difficult to do the news. You know, what I think is fantastic is to be a multimedia broadcast, a multimedia journalist today. The opportunities that you have as a multimedia journalist, whether it's on Channel 4 News or at Sky or the BBC or Reuters or anywhere, are you know, huge, not only in the way you gather news, but in the way you put it out. You know, you can gather it in, an individual journalist can gather it, we're using lightweight equipment, very fast communications, and then you can disseminate it across a lot of platforms. And I think the crucial thing really is that television has a huge place for particular sorts of news. You know, who, if they could, wouldn't be up at 2 o'clock tomorrow morning watching the first Chilean miners coming up live on television? You're not going to do that on the web. You're not going to do that on radio. You're not going to wait for a newspaper. You want to see that on television. Now, I might actually be asleep because I have to get up in the morning, but I think a lot of people I know will stay up. You certainly want to share big news events on TV because TV is a fantastic medium for delivering mass audience big news stories. But the web is a great medium for developing, and mobile, you know, iPads, whatever, a great medium for delivering different sorts of news. So at Sky, we're a multi-platform news organisation, and we don't favour one particular platform.
Ben, I mean, he's not right though, is it? Because you know, I've watched, you know, the Chilean miners, so all the Chilean miner stuff that I watched today was online.
Yeah.
You know, there's live
on an
streaming
iPad.
online.
Yeah, but I'm talking about when they come up. At the moment they come up, you're going to watch it
I actually think, no, you're wrong, Matt. For the live event stuff, actually seeing it live on TV kind of works.
Yeah.
I wanted to watch Gordon Brown resign on television, and I didn't. And I actually caught it on the radio, and actually I was glad I did because it made me listen to the words a bit more rather than the body language. But the big moments, I just think the only thing about watching it online is that you're watching it often on demand, and you're not feeling like I'm in this same experience as X million other people. However, I think it's only the case for a very small amount of news events that happen, you know, once a month or something. That's something you want to be part of.
I mean, truth be told, I mean, I often watch a lot of television online. I mean, same thing, right? I mean, got a decent enough internet connection, so I'm watching live events online quite regularly. World Cup, I watched.
I guess it's just a question of what we call television.
Well, no, I mean, you know, let's just be clear about it. In Britain, if you want to watch television news in high definition, you've got to watch it on TV. True. On Sky.
Sky Channel 517.
On Sky.
I can't get on my free
It's still constantly on the
but I do agree with the idea that live content, you know, is still incredibly valuable. It is something you've got to wake up for. It is more likely to get someone to switch on their device.
What about Peter? Let's tackle this issue of quality and range, because there's more of it. We're agreed on, but more doesn't necessarily mean better, does it?
It doesn't, and I think that some of that can be about a greater diversity of stories because of the lightweight techniques that Simon's talked about, and certainly one of the things that we're working on in the BBC's international news area is to make sure that a wider range of our correspondents working, for instance, in our language services are equipped with cameras. So our Urdu teams in Pakistan have now all got small flash-style cameras, and so if something happens, so for instance the recent attack on the NATO fuel convoy, one of our Urdu language correspondents was there. That expands the range. I think in terms of quality, I think there is a genuine issue there in terms of resources that can go into digging. Channel 4 Newsnight still do a very good job with that, but there's clearly a risk that a drive towards being there, delivering, spreading everything very thinly can mean that news organisations don't retain the resource to be able to do those more quality, in-depth pieces, because time does equal quality, and I think it's up to all of us to watch out for that and to make sure there's still sufficient going into it.
Simon, are you worried that are you concerned at Sky to ensure that just because you can do things doesn't mean that you necessarily should, and that the quality of the outcome, you should be paying as much attention to the quality of the outcome as just the fact that you can do things?
Yes, I mean, I think that's what goes without saying. But the fact is that because we have a lot of resource around the world and we have a lot of airtime, we're able to cover a lot of news, and we do it very efficiently. I think that we've led the way in many ways in how to do 24-hour news relatively cheaply, and we've by using new technology. But as I say. We do it on a lot of platforms. We don't just do it on TV. We do it on the web. We do it on mobile. We do it on big screens and stations. We think of ourselves as a multi-platform news organisation.
Ben, should we be concerned about quality because there is a bearing down on costs at even public broadcasters who have guaranteed funding, and particularly commercial broadcasters who don't, and even though the technology is cheaper and it is easier to get anywhere around the world, these days the sorts of investigatory stuff that Peter talks about, the kind of things that you do at Channel 4 and that BBC does at Newsnight, are increasingly squeezed, aren't they?
Well, it's difficult because the more that you multitask, so if you're trying to do more than one thing at a time, the less time you have to do to actually do a good digging piece. So it's obvious about resources. So if the producer is also the cameraman, who's also the editor, well, the producer can't do any research, so the reporter does research. We no longer have it, but when we had more 4 News, the producer was the reporter, was the editor, was the cameraman, and having to do it all at the same time. And clearly, you cannot spend the same amount of time digging in depth, particularly on a breaking news story. But I can see the flip side, though. So I was yesterday at the Microsoft Windows Phone launch, and for various reasons, they decided not to run the story on TV. So just before before the press conference started, the cameraman was whisked away because we've got finite resources. And then, unexpectedly, Stephen Fry appears and gives a great soundbite about, wow, now actually like Microsoft phones, and they previously said that they were as hideous as a 1960s council block. And I was like, what should I do? Rory Kathleen Jones, my rival at the BBC, was merrily laughing because he had his cameraman there. And I thought, well, I'll take my iPhone out and I'll try and record it. But there's absolutely no way that I'm going to broadcast that on television because it was shaky and horrible. And it meant that we missed the moment. But however, had I also had some sort of piece of kit, whether it's a flip video camera or a mini DV camera, I might have been able, and I'd been trained, I might have been able to put something out. So I can see that there's...
You don't need to be trained to use a flip camera.
No, not to flip, well, set the tripod up and to make sure it's lit and nice. To get this, maybe not at Sky, but at the great standards at Channel 4 News, you might want to have some training on
flip training.
But I can see that there are moments, and there's been moments where the resources aren't there, and I wish, oh my God, I wish I was a multi-skilled journalist and I can do that. But then there are all those other times when I'm sitting there trying to dig right into a story, and I'm glad that I'm not, and that there's someone else doing that, and I can just spend some time pestering a government department or whatever it is that we're investigating.
It is a concern, though, isn't it, Peter, that increasingly it is down to a smaller number of news organisations who are able to put the resources into disagree into the kind of journalism that you talked about.
Yes, I'm not sure that it's something that's particularly to do with video news versus other platforms or TV versus other platforms. It's more about the overall broadcasting business, and clearly ITV, when it had World in Action and This Week, was doing a different range of investigative journalism than it's currently doing, and that's part of a broader change. But I think it's an example of what you have to watch out for, whatever your funding model is, in terms of the pressures that there are, and what the balance is between the audience's desire to be there, to see things immediately, to have that breaking news or that rolling news service, but also to make sure that you retain sufficient resource and apply it really smartly to be able to dig in a little bit more and come up with things which are genuinely original, rather than the same as everyone else is doing.
But
I'm just going to say, I mean, when it comes to quality, first of all, I think technology definitely allows higher quality by and large. I mean, we're going to roll out HD distribution very shortly. We do HD news gathering, very easy to do. So that's a kind of given, right? I mean, quality is going to improve simply because the great technology is much cheaper. But I think it's not correct to say that, you know, investigative journalism, say high quality journalism is, you know, in a way, it's become easier for others to carry out. So we, for example, speak to some folks called the Investigative News Network in the US, which is a group of sort of advocacy groups and things, largely in print, but we're also working on video initiatives. So I think it's much easier now for people to go and produce, you know, video news and investigative pieces, even if you're a single operator. I've had people come and pitch me items which they've gone and produced themselves on topics. So I'm not sure. Well, I accept that, you know, traditional organizations are under pressure, and there may well be a decrease in their ability to produce high-quality, long-format content. You know, I think there's more out there to work with, and a lot more sources who can produce that sort of thing.
You don't think so?
Well, I think that collaborative efforts around investigative journalism are absolutely to be supported, and you know, we've done similar collaborations. The Consortium of Investigative Journalists, we did a recent investigation into the global asbestos business, which worked extremely well. But there is something about major institutions that can deal with legal risks, that can assess editorial policy issues, and that have got the ability to be able to then get those stories to as large an audience as possible. So absolutely, we should be cooperating in partnership with as many organisations that have got public purpose journalism you know, in their aims. But you do need some institutions that are going to shepherd those things through, because I think it's very, very difficult if you're a sole operator to do something that's going to take on some big, powerful organisations.
And there are fewer institutions now like this, Simon, who have the money or the effort or the willpower to be able to do this.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's undoubtedly true.
I mean, you know, we at ITN, when you were at ITN, you did have the resources and the money and the backing to be able to do difficult stuff, and ITV don't have that now.
Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, we do. At Sky. At Sky. I mean, you know, given that our primary sort of a point of existence is to be a 24-hour rolling news channel, we do a lot of international coverage. We do a fair amount of investigative stuff. Particularly, you know, you might recall some of the stuff that Dominic Waghorn did in China, which you know, I think classes.
One RTS was, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, so you know, we do that for sure, but you have to have deep pockets to do it, and there's no doubt that there's dwindling amount of it, and you know, I think that when we talk about is this a golden age of television, you know, do not forget that ITV has more or less given up on television news. I mean, it's certainly given up on regional news in Britain, and it's squeezed the budget at ITN, and so you know, I think it's a golden age in the ways that I described earlier. But I think it would be wrong to forget that ITV as a very once proud provider of news in Britain.
You do spend still a huge amount of money on making regional news.
Former self, yeah, I know, but he doesn't want to. And
shadow of its former self is what you said.
I would say, yeah, I would say ITV ITV News as a collective body, if you like, across the whole country. You know, is a very different being from what it was even 10 years ago.
I should say that actually, if you think about it, Channel 4 News, which is an ITN product, manages to do huge levels of in-depth programming for very, very little money.
But not for a mass audience, though. And this has implications, doesn't it, Peter, particularly in Britain, because it means that it's just the BBC that's left providing quality journalism to a mass market.
Well, Sky clearly is pretty widely distributed now, but certainly in terms of the main way in which people who don't have a specific interest in news consume news. There was discussion earlier about the bulletins. Bulletins are still hugely important. I mean, 8 in 10 of the British public come to BBC News, and 7 in 10 of that is through bulletins. I mean, they're still absolutely crucial. But you're completely right about the way that ITV has withdrawn from a range of things.
You agree with Simon's
I do. I mean, if you think about some major news events in the last few months, the coverage the outcome, of the aftermath of the election, and the event that was being referred to earlier with Gordon Brown leaving and David Cameron going, that was covered by the BBC with hours of primetime coverage. There was some early ITV coverage of that, but they didn't actually cover the main moment. And then with the recent visit of the Pope, if you go back to the last Pope's visit, there was coverage on both BBC One and ITV, who in effect sort of split the schedules between them in that kind of old sort of duopoly style. But that was covered by both, and ITV wasn't doing that at all. It wasn't absolutely wasn't part of its role. And I, you know, in terms of the BBC, the importance of the BBC's role, clearly that helps in one way to support it, but it's not something that we welcome, because not having that competition in the terrestrial news area is not good for the BBC, because it means there's less direct competition than there should be, and we regret that.
And Greg, you have a sort of an international perspective. It's the same thing. This is happening in countries around the world, isn't it? I
think in developed markets, certainly. I mean, in emerging markets, I think there is, in fact, a golden age unraveling, or unfolding, I'd say, possibly in India, for example, where I think you've got a bit of a free-for-all in terms of numbers of channels. It was something like 93 news channels at last count, and you know, at least 6 of them 24 hours in English. So I think it remains to be seen. Will there be sort of an effort to go more into investigative journalism, into longer format content? But you know, in the US, it seems to have sort of fallen off the radar in some ways. Certainly 60 Minutes is still out there doing a degree of it. Some of the large networks promote it. It seems to me in the United States, actually, the thing I've noticed is that you have longer form documentary out in the film world now, more and more of it. If you look at what's just come out, The Inside Job, or some of the other things that have been out in the last year or two, it seems like there are a lot more documentaries out there. I'm getting even interest from Hollywood. So, and of course on platforms like National Geographic, Discovery, etc. So it does feel like it's pulling out of the broadcast television news universe, but going onto other platforms.
Well, one of the ironies is that there's sort of a huge proliferation of television stations, particularly in the Asian subcontinent, China, but the quality of the news coverage is actually, you know, let's face it, not great. I mean, and what's sort of tragic in a way is that some of those amazing skills, broadcast skills that were developed, you know, by both BBC and ITN over the years, and have fed through to broadcasting, not just in Britain but in other places, I think is going to get lost, and you know, you're going to see a proliferation of channels in other parts of the world, sort of emerging channels, which are frankly, you know, they're pointing cameras and shooting, but they're not actually necessarily producing high quality content.
Yeah, well, they're sensationalist. Just visually, I mean, if you've seen some of the channels in Pakistan, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, they have standardised graphics for suicide bombers, and you sort of see people walking across the Aston on the screen and then blowing themselves up, which is they just use that as a way of attracting attention. And it's quite extraordinary, the kind of extent of, in effect, the desensitisation or pornographic use of images of violence. And then obviously there's a slightly different trend in the US, which is about opinion and comment and polarisation, and again, a way of trying to keep the news vibrant, but it's not, I suppose, a UK definition of quality, but you can see that those commercial trends in other parts of the world are taking us in places that are quite different from the level of quality.
Well, I mean, you say it's not the UK definition of quality, is it? But it's somebody else's definition of quality.
It is, yeah. Well, not necessarily quality, but it's certainly clearly what someone thinks that audiences are looking for. Yeah.
I think, though, at the end of the day, you've got to recognise that most traditional news content, the stuff we sat down, I grew up watching CBS News, you know, and most of that news you already know by the time you sit down to watch a bulletin at 6 o'clock. So this is the struggle broadcasters have. Is it going to be in-depth? Is it going to be opinion? But it's probably not going to be a lot of what you used to see.
And CBS have admitted, haven't they? I can't remember which executive it was, but it might have been Moonves, admitted that the Katie Couric deal was probably the last deal of that kind.
Yeah. No, they're not going to continue to pay the sort of numbers that they do for the anchors. It's pretty clear. But they're struggling for definition, especially in a world where Fox and MSNBC have defined this kind of left and right, and you can go and hear the sort of views that you'd like to hear. What is the relevance of a very balanced news organization in the United States? It's a real question.
But I think you can. I disagree. I think you can go on producing high quality news that is also breaking, you know, unfolding news. And I don't think because you're doing something different from what old terrestrial bulletins did, that doesn't mean that you have to abandon quality.
I'd like to agree. I'm just not sure the audiences do, ultimately. I mean, I think in the UK you still have a lot of that going on. I think you've got a great channel, and BBC as well. But if I switch on the television in the US, it is pretty remarkable for me. And I've been outside a long time, I have to confess. But I'm not sure that's where audiences are today.
Will those sorts of pressures, because these are commercial pressures presumably that are driving this will come here, won't it?
No, you've got a different scenario. I mean, you do have the BBC with its licensing model, and it is different. I mean, it's a smaller country, obviously, more culturally attuned, possibly, to broadcast sort of history here and the traditions of Newsnight and all the kind of bulletins. The US, I think, is just more fragmented and possibly slightly more advanced in the internet culture. But I'm not sure it's guaranteed to come here. I think a place like India, it certainly will.
Peter, the difference here, I guess, is that we have regulated impartiality. It's the law. You have to be impartial. It covers Sky as well. Is that do you think that is enough of a protection, and that kind of tradition will prevent this kind of fragmentation and polarisation that you talk about?
It's hard to know, isn't it? I mean, if you took away regulation and if you took away the public policy interventions which lead to the BBC or Channel 4 and to some extent ITV producing news, what would happen? Would the market view be that the British public, because of that history and culture that you talked about, would demand high-quality news, or would it go in the direction of those international comparisons that we talked about? It's hard to know how you play that through. My guess would be that without those policy interventions and without that public support, then the commercial market would tend to be like other parts of the world. I mean, why not? Because that's usually what happens in other markets. You know, international trends tend to apply in the UK. So the reason why we're different is because we're protected, probably.
And why not? Why not anyway? Because would that necessarily would more opinionated, less regulated news in the UK necessarily be a bad thing anyway, Simon?
Well, I mean, you know, our experience is that what we do is pretty successful, which is, you know, sort of part of the reason we do it. I mean, you know, as you say, we're regulated, but we also do it because it's good business sense. The public likes what we do. So,
well, I mean, that's
even if the rules were changed, I'm not sure that I don't think we would necessarily want to change our output.
Are you really sure?
Yeah, I was just going to say, are you really sure about that? I mean, this is it's for you. You've been around the block, and you're part of the, you know, you're in the veteran league at Sky. But
take that positive.
Is that a compliment?
Yes, it is. And you're part of the great tradition of, you know, the Nick Pollard school of Sky News, perhaps. But are you? But is that necessarily what the new young management of Sky, the James Murdochs and his acolytes, is that what they really want for?
Well, they've certainly shown no indication that they want to do anything different. And, you know, I mean, all I would say was that the product seems to work quite well, pretty well, very well. So, you know, and you know Rupert likes and James like products that do well. Yeah. So I see no indication that they want to change it.
But if it went, wouldn't you sort of think, let's try out an hour in the evening, let's try out a kind of shock jock, talk show, opinionated, and see how that goes? There'd be bound to be a move towards that, a testing of that, and possibly innovation.
I think in a sense, you know, you pose the wrong question, Peter, because you know, if you say to me, you know, would you do a shock jock? Would you do?
Well, they did Little John, and it was rubbish.
We did Little John, I mean, you could argue that Jeff Randall is sort of a kind of business. I'm not going to say a shock jock, but he is a more of a polemical presenter than a newsreader. But you know, I'm clearly not going to say we're going to go for shock jocks. You know, if the rules were relaxed, who knows? You know where we would go. I'm not. You know, I'm not.
Maybe not on Sky News, but maybe another.
Not on Sky News, maybe on another channel. But But you know what I stress is that what we do at the moment works very well. So I don't see any inclination to change it, even if the rules were relaxed.
Do you get the sense that I mean, we're in an environment, Ben, in a political environment where it's tending towards deregulation and.
I think it's quite exciting.
Yeah.
If you think about. People think that Channel 4 News has a news agenda. I mean, it doesn't. It does, maybe it doesn't. But on the website, we're in a sense exposing the correspondents and the presenters to allow us to say what we think and what we want, and we're looking very much towards comment as a differentiation between what the BBC are doing, where you're covering everything.
So that's interesting. So you apply different editorial values online.
I didn't say
TV,
it's different editorial values, but we're allowed to express.
Like.
Well, we're allowed to express a bit more about what we think about the story.
I the right thing. I'm just interested.
When I wrote on my piece about the Windows Phone yesterday that I quite liked it, and what I wouldn't go on TV, and John asks me in a live, well, Ben, so what's this? And I say, well, I really like this,
well,
and this is why.
And
we don't,
fine.
but you can.
I mean, you might actually. You might. I can't see necessarily that you wouldn't. But
commercial impartiality as well.
Well, I was going to say when it comes to political impartiality, is Gary Gibbon going to give marks out of 10 for
no, but I
the
think you can
speeches?
go slightly. You can reveal slightly more about the personality behind the piece and a bit more. If you read some of the things that Krishnan and John write on their blogs, it's a little bit further than they'd go on television. And we are applying a different view because we're trying to get to there's sort of 10, 15 correspondents that are blogging and doing stuff on the website. What do we think about the story? What informs our journalism? What's the things we're reading about? And even if you think about on Twitter, what are the stories that I retweet on Twitter? Sometimes they're the stories that actually reflect my own view. So a comment piece that I find about something, whether it be a review of a phone or actually a political story or something to do with like LGBT rights, I'm retweeting it. You could argue I'm making an editorial judgment there.
Impartial tweeting doesn't work very well, I think. I think it's quite problematic to get an impartial view into characters, which is why your partiality works.
But you have Twitter guidelines, don't you?
We have them as well.
Yeah, but let's talk about
that's
why.
Right. We should do.
There's quite a lot of ironic retweeting, isn't there?
I think if you talk about why you do these things, though, I mean, it's pretty clear. A lot of people, a lot of viewers, users want this content. I mean, for us, I'm just thinking about the things we've done in the last year or two. We bought a company called Breaking Views, which is founded by Financial Times journalists to deliver viewpoints and opinion. And our customers, even in our financial services business, which is about very undifferentiated, unbiased content, right, that's valuable to financial markets, even there, people are saying, look, give us a viewpoint, give us an opinion. Some of the key feedback we've had from customers globally is, what's your view? What's your point of view? And
so this is interesting, Peter, because this is being driven both by the audience, by commercial factors, and by the different values that are expected and expressed online. So you might find yourself at the BBC squeezed because all these other guys are able to do it, but you're not.
Well, possibly, or you could say that's a very distinct market differentiation, that you're doing something which isn't on offer elsewhere, and certainly that helps us enormously internationally. The standards that we apply, which is not about just doing it in an old-fashioned way, because the style and the way that you deliver it has to change enormously. But sticking to that kind of rigorous accuracy and impartiality is something which distinguishes us around the world. And in the UK, possibly if regulation changed or if commercial judgments altered, then I think the BBC sticking to that is probably the right thing to do, because it's a strength. And people don't just consume one news source. They might want to come to the BBC for one type of thing, and they don't want it to have a perspective, but they do want to go to other people with perspectives.
Why should news not be competing in the marketplace the way that all the other bits of the BBC has to compete in the marketplace? We constantly hear that the reason Jonathan Ross had to be paid all that money was because they were competing in the marketplace in entertainment.
I was saying
it's commercial.
You can see it as a competitive position because our distinctive.
Well, I can see that, but surely wouldn't you be more inclined to compete on the same terms? So you'd need to put on programmes that were equally shock jockish.
I don't know.
In this hypothetical shock jock world.
Certainly not one-sided programmes. I mean, but I think there is something about the fact that there's more opinion out there, which
impartial shock jocks,
which influences.
We used to have John Gaunt on BBC London.
Yeah, we did, but there have been issues about people who are too opinionated, and they're not there. But I think we've certainly expanded the range of views that are within the BBC. The old kind of impartiality that we had was very much sort of, staying in the centre, trying to kind of balance between, a left-wing party and a right-wing party. Now there's a much wider range of views. So, famously, having the BNP on Question Time or interviews with the Taliban, all those sorts of things. And some of that which we can do in an impartial way, but some of that response is about a broader view which has been influenced by the range of views that's available, particularly on the internet, I'd say.
OK. What about taking a broader range of views here? And I wondered if any of these issues, lots of issues that we've kind of gone through so far, raised questions amongst you and things that you would like to explore more. They must have done. I can't believe they haven't. Yes. Microphone. Say who you are.
Melissa Wright. I had one question. I think, Pete, I think you mentioned it very briefly, sort of about citizen journalism. Obviously, blogging itself has come under quite a bit of criticism. Most recently, I think it was Andrew Marr on the BBC, not expressing a few quite controversial views. Do you think...
Which Krishnan criticised.
He did, and that was very sweet of him. Do you think there's a place for video blogging? And by that, for example, homemade documentaries or even clips of breaking news. I mean, we've seen it, for example, with the bombings in London. There was clips from mobiles being used, that sort of thing on the news. Do we think going forward news organisations can make use of video bloggers, citizen journalists at all in their programmes and their way of reporting?
Do you share the Andrew Marr critique?
No, I don't. I don't. But I do think that the role of citizen journalism as a source for professional news organisations is actually still relatively small and probably not likely to grow that much, just simply because, as an average citizen, how often do you come across something that's really sufficiently newsworthy? And it's fantastic to have it as a source. It's not about not doing it, but you need to be realistic about how much you're actually going to get from that. I think that it plays an absolutely crucial role in terms of that range of opinion around the news, and whether that's incorporated into partial programmes and opinionated programmes, or whether it's just used in the way that we would use it as a range of views around a story. Of course, that's absolutely vital, and those views, whether they're bloggers or tweeters or whatever, or video blogging or whatever way it might be, is something that all news organisations should be open to. But the actual pure journalistic value of it can increase, but I don't think it'll ever be dominant for professional news organisations.
Correct. I was just going to say, I mean, having said all that, and I don't disagree, if you look back at the Tehran sort of revolution that wasn't, we sourced a lot of video off of Twitter feeds. Absolutely. Frankly, people were uploading stuff off mobile phones, and some of it was available via Twitter. I mean, I don't know if you saw, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a great piece about, the uselessness of citizen journalism as well, but I don't agree. I mean, I think there are, and how ineffective Twitter was actually in Iran at the end of the day. But I'm not sure. I think it's just such early days. It is going to be a source for media companies like ourselves, long term.
It's a source. I mean, it's a source for me. Every single report that I do is crowdsourced. We live blog every program on Twitter, and when I'm doing a piece, I go to the 5,000–6,000 people who are experts on my Twitter followers and say, what do you think about this story? Who should I interview? Do you have something to contribute? Someone uploads a blog. Someone says, here's someone's phone number. It actually. It's so bizarre for me because I mean I know it's very much my niche.
You're talking about slightly different things, aren't
well,
you?
But you're not, because actually you can incorporate that into all sorts of news, and that's something that we are looking at.
You remember the plane that landed in the Hudson? The first picture of that was on Twitter. Came on Twitter.
And you need to be tapped into it, and just in the way that I'm doing it for my niche, we're doing it as an organisation at Channel 4 News to all of our specialists being tapped into the different conversations that are going on, not just on Twitter but on blogs. And actually, yeah, citizen journalism, I think, if you use it right and you have a large enough network, you will have people who happen to be in a place where a breaking news story happens. And also, certainly for BBC, I would argue that when it goes down to hyperlocal news, people are next to something that happens. Yeah, if it's like a bus, just like a bus crashed into a roundabout, that's actually quite interesting hyperlocal news. You can be tapping into that.
I think the interesting thing is, and I think you're absolutely right, it's a really good point that you've made, that these kind of expert communities in particular areas, are they pro, are they am, they're both, and sort of certainly around politics and the way that kind of conversation, through the party conferences, through the election, develops, and the interrelationship between people who are professional journalists or people who are party activists or somewhere in between, and the way that builds the story clearly does play an important part, and absolutely our political team are part of that and using that as their source. You're right about that.
All right, question there.
Hello, I work for an international humanitarian organisation, Médecins Sans Frontières, and I work in the press team trying to pitch stories to Channel 4, Sky News, BBC, so on and so forth. What I find quite a lot is that when there's a big TV-friendly disaster, such as the Haitian earthquake, Pakistan floods to perhaps less extent, people constantly trying to do interviews and things like that. But when there's not TV pictures, we can't. TV won't do the story. They're just. I'm told again and again and again by journalists, if there's not moving pictures, they can't do it. Increasingly, I'm finding that even when it's a big story, if we haven't got BGANs, if we can't provide live interviews from the field, they won't do phonos, so we just can't get the stories on. Often we try and pitch stories, but we're told again and again that there's no budget for it and they can't afford to do it. So I just wondered where you felt that in a world of increasingly tightly squeezed budgets, where foreign news is going to go for stories from Democratic Republic of Congo, from Central African Republic, from the more obscure parts of Africa.
Peter, you're ideally placed to answer this.
I do recognise some of that, and it's not surprising that television and news producers are looking for pictures. I mean, I don't we should be surprised. That's not something to be ashamed of, because you need coverage that's going to work with audiences, and that's the judgment that's being made. But clearly, if stories of real significance aren't being covered because of that, that's something which we will be concerned about. There's a vast.
And you don't think they are?
Well, I'd love to hear some specific examples, but clearly there's a wide range of journalism because of multi-platform that all the different news organisations represented here, and there are ways in which stories can build. So clearly the BBC's commitment through online and radio is really strong. We organise ourselves to make sure that stories that are done for those services appear across platforms. So there may be a World Service correspondent or a World Service Language Service correspondent who will initially cover it, and then it can grow. And we have to work with organisations like yours to work out what's the way of being able to get those visuals. How can they be supported? And I know some humanitarian NGO organisations are investing in their own news gathering resources, to put it in a better way. I think there are issues that we then have to think about where those pictures come from, how they're described.
They're doing this because, this is really interesting because I mean, it sounds like you do a bit of that. They're doing this presumably because there is less investment from the broadcasters, so they won't invest, so charities do.
Well, I think it's partly about an international news picture. I would say that in terms of the kinds of people who come to this club, the kinds of people who want to make programming about the world, that the UK actually stands in very, very good comparison to the rest of the world. Very often, we're the organisations that are leading the way, and it's not an accident. There are lots of NGOs and humanitarian organisations in this capital because it's a place where you can do things, and it's harder elsewhere. But we need to work with other organisations and with partners who we need to work with, whilst respecting our editorial independence, but to cooperate to be able to do those sorts of stories.
What sort of investment do you make in news gathering equipment?
Well, what we started doing, because there is a demand for it, is when you've got a major news disaster, we do send camera people out and we FTP back the footage overnight, and we send it to agents. We send it to agencies who have been known, who run our stuff, because the BBC won't take it because it's not impartial. But what we're finding is that unless we've, somewhere like South Sudan, where there's a Kala-Azar outbreak at the moment, places like Chad, where there's been nutritional crises, unless we supply those pictures, people aren't interested. I mean, Niger got a fair amount of coverage this year, but a lot of these places, unless we actually put the money in ourselves and supply that B-roll, it's not going to get covered. And, you know, I'm sure that many people would agree that the Haitian earthquake partly got so much coverage because it was easy to get to and it was close to states. If that had happened in DRC or in a harder to access area, I'm sure that it wouldn't have got quarter the amount of coverage.
There was Pakistan, which was in a terribly hard to access part of the country, wasn't it? But I mean, Greg, is this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly correct. I mean, agencies tend to syndicate the sort of content that they get from Médecins Sans Frontières or other groups, and we identify it as third-party content, and it is ultimately up to broadcasters to use it. But I guess the challenge is, you know, yes, in the world of television, images are important. You're not ever going to escape it. That's a reality. But the challenge for an organization like yours is, you know, how do you deliver your message? And I guess you need to continue to innovate on how you promote that message, whether it's via social media or whether it's continuing to, whether it's opening up, for example, your people on the ground to live interviews, which I think the BBC probably is more open to. That's a challenge for NGOs. I mean, we run a website called AlertNet, where we try to aggregate and allow sort of NGOs a platform for discussion and debate. And we do think about, as we change our distribution model overall for content, you know, giving people the ability to distribute via Reuters into more newsrooms globally on a more regular basis. I mean, the idea of a Médecins Sans Frontières channel, for example, becomes plausible as technology costs reduce. But, you know, at the end of the day, coming back to the issue you raise, I mean, pictures are pictures as a television news person originally.
At the back, yes.
John Owen. There are other channels that are covering the rest of the world, CNN, the one I'm working with right now, Al Jazeera English. You can't name a part of the world that's not being covered in person by a correspondent like Jonah Hull sitting there, or being done in long form in documentaries like Witness and People in Power. They're all being covered. And also, I think that you're also excluding, as part of the golden era of television, the emergence of the really impressive young national reporters from their own countries who have the skill set, have the language, have the knowledge, and are bringing a kind of perspective that you're not getting from many other channels and organizations. It's not to say that you're still not getting great reporting from the likes of one of the great reporters of all time sitting in the front row, Tom Fenton from CBS, but you're also getting these young, wonderfully developed reporters who are bringing a perspective that we've never had in the past.
I mean, is that right? Do you agree?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I'm full of admiration for Al Jazeera particularly, which I think is a remarkable television news channel, and I'm sure that Peter agrees. I mean, the quality of some of their reporting is extraordinary. I mean, I suppose that, John, we're talking about the context of largely a sort of British perspective, which is
on preview.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, but I suppose I'm defending the insularity of the conversation.
Well, I've been trying to expand it, but we keep getting dragged back in.
Go for it. Why don't let's ask Tom Fenton?
I'll come back to you, but. Do you agree with your colleagues' analysis?
Yes. Well, if I can give you an opinion, I was going to keep my mouth shut. I don't think the conversation has supported the premise that we're in a golden age. We're certainly in a golden age of means of distribution. I'm not convinced that news gathering is better, more widespread than it was before. I would love to be a video buddy or multitasking and doing the sort of thing you can do now. I'm not quite sure how this is going to end up, but I think that's clearly the future. But golden age, I think it's a bit hard to support.
Back with you at the back row with the light blue shirt.
Hi, I'm a media student at SOAS, and we often look at media beyond the West. That kind of area. And recently we came across the growth of, in the Middle East area, and someone did mention the booming media in other parts of the world while it's declining, the mainstream media is declining in the West or in England. And in Middle East, for example, Chinese international television has started to broadcast, and they actually have Chinese journalists speaking Arabic in the Middle East area. I mean, they're not training other people; they're training their own people to speak the language of the Middle East. I mean, in terms of global strategies of BBC, for example, which has a huge following. In fact, even in my part of the world, in India, despite the 96 odd news channels, BBC still carries a certain gravitas. In terms of the global strategies for someone like you, what would be the priority areas? Would it be still maintaining that sort of global viewpoints, or would you be interested in localizing your news and maybe doing special newscasts in different regions?
Peter, this is interesting. I mean, you've raised the issue which you, Peter, raised in your speech last night to the Commonwealth Institute.
Commonwealth Broadcasters Association.
In which you talked about, I mean, you mentioned, which I think was being referred to, China's state-owned English language news channel, CCTV, you mentioned, planning to increase its bureaus from 19 to 56. Russia Today had a budget, you said, of $70 billion.
No, it should say million.
Million. Dollars.
Billion. Is that from The Guardian?
It's the Guardian coverage. That our release was correct.
You don't think some of that?
This is
Copy and paste.
I was just going to say when I was reading that. But you know, James Robinson must be right. $70 million. I mean, that's an enormous amount of money. What does this mean, do you think? What's the point you're making?
Well, I was making a point in relation to the level of investment that the UK has in it, and you know, as you probably gathered, we're involved in discussions right at the moment about that. So it was partly about that, but it was also about how the BBC, despite its huge resources, it's relatively small compared to some of these competitor forces. And I was talking about how we need to move from a kind of quite institutional, you know, ourselves alone mindset and partner much more with, you know, whether it's independent documentary makers in the UK or the kinds of broadcasters that John was talking about, who can offer things with an authentic perspective from their part of the world, but also to cooperate with other public service international broadcasters, so Deutsche Welle or Voice of America, and people who share similar values. And we can't do it all ourselves, and we shouldn't want to. But that's not about what the world is about. So, in terms of where do we broadcast our global English services, we're trying to maintain those as fully globally distributed services as possible. And then, you know, which are the markets that we can afford to be in? Some of those will only be in radio. Some of those we can be in television as well. And that's according to where the audience need is greatest. You know, in terms of media freedom or in terms of media plurality around the world, and how much of that we're able to do and on which platforms, I'll be able to tell you rather more clearly on Wednesday next week than I can today.
Well, let's come back to funding, because that's a whole other kind of issue. But I want to stick with this, the really interesting development, Greg, about states funding news networks.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I'm surprised to hear Peter use, that he considers CCTV and Russia Today sort of competitive forces, because, I mean, I think they've got a slightly different mission, frankly. I don't think your mission is to promote the wonderful aspects of Britain globally. I think it's not that.
No,
and I think that is different from what CCTV and Russia Today are about, at least for now. I mean, this is about the expression of soft power by China, by Russia, and particularly by China. We work pretty closely with CCTV to explore things. We do some business reporting for them, actually, out of a bunch of our bureaus, which has been a really interesting experience because it's not been as monolithic as you might think. It gets into a debate, and it's interesting to understand what they're interested in. That in itself is a story. But, you know, I think it's very early days. They look at the West and they see CNN and BBC and, to some degree, even Al Jazeera, which is possibly a slightly Western point of view channel, or neutral point of view channel.
Also state funded.
And I think they look at that and think we need to be there too. But very early days, it's clear that the money is not to be trifled with. They are paying for distribution in the US, they're paying for distribution here. They are setting up, it's more than the bureaus that you've mentioned. The conversations I've had in Beijing are north of 100. And it's not about our bottom line, ultimately. It's about
I mean, it seems to me that the emergence of these state-funded channels only underlines the importance of impartial channels who people can trust and believe in, and know that wherever the funding comes from, that they are going to be impartial. So, in a way, that just sort of makes me even more confident that our mission to be an impartial news channel is the right one.
And it's interesting, Ben, in that the states can throw all the money that they want at broadcasting and channels and trying to get international reach in that way. Iran is trying to do it with Press TV, which has a base here, but that still doesn't necessarily mean that you get your point of view across.
No, well, mainly because of the internet, and you've got this. You're talking about state forces. There's also algorithm forces in play here, and there's other platforms. And to me, and certainly it's thinking that we're having, that things like Facebook are much more important. If you could think about the future of television, the golden age, and all this stuff, actually, video content in Facebook is incredibly important. How do people see that video content? Determined actually by very complex algorithm based on what you've previously watched and clicked and liked and things. And the same with Google. So ITN magnificently somehow is the #1 TV, news channel on Google, on YouTube UK. Mainly because of quite good use of understanding of the Google video algorithm. And you might have state forces, you might have all these things playing there, but actually there's the corporations as well, which in the future, and when we look at the launch of Google TV in the States very shortly and coming here next year, there will be computers and all sorts of things, algorithms effectively, determining what content we see, and maybe more relevant to us, but that stops some of these forces.
Correct. Yeah, we've done some, we've launched a platform recently around financial video, which is called Insider, and it is actually designed to let the user be a news editor, and you can search China Yuan and go have a channel on all about the Chinese yuan, and it's Reuters content and it's an aggregation of third-party content. It's an interesting experience. It's not a commercial model at this stage, but there's a lot to learn there around algorithms and around metadata in particular, and how you extract information about what video content is. The idea, though, of handing editorial control to a user, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to experiment with it.
I think that's a phenomenally exciting development that we will see next year, and certainly as we move towards, I'm seeing a demo of UView, the new canvas, tomorrow, and I'm sure that all of
which is what?
Well, which is the IPTV iCanvas. So I don't know what we're going to see, but I'm intrigued, and we're all intrigued about how we can personalise bulletins, how the viewer takes control, whether that be deciding the running order or actually we will think about radical things like that, but also seeing content that is most relevant to them. I am not interested in football, so don't show me a bulletin that has that. And the power of IPTV and all these sort of systems and Facebook will allow that to happen, and that will fundamentally change power of all sorts of broadcasters, because the power will vest in me and it will vest in the computer. It probably won't vest in you.
Yeah, and that's where I'm schizophrenic, actually. I've seen Tom Fenton before, of course, as a younger person. I do long for that time when we gathered around the TV and there was a kind of common discussion. And of course, that's going to disappear if users start going after content they only care about.
I don't think it will disappear. You see, I think that there will always be people who want something built for them. They want people to edit, but then at different times.
But it will be built for them, but just possibly in a different fashion.
Well, it may be built for them, but it may give them an opportunity to also pick and choose about other stuff. I mean, the beauty of convergence is that you can have all these things.
Peter?
I think that what IPTV will do is probably the next big disruptive thing in terms of video news. And it's been quite interesting with the BBC teams who've been coming together to think about how news on IPTV will work. And broadly, the people who come from an online background tend to think, or the thing that people really, really want is high degree of control. They'll want to be able to sort of choose their own running order and put all their videos in sequence. And the people who come from a TV sort of sit back and watch it background are saying, well, no, actually, what we can do is we can give people a 5-minute bulletin, or you can subscribe to a 10-minute bulletin, which is, Hugh Edwards or Fiona Bruce's choice of the day, or whatever it might be, or you'll choose your kind of sub-brand of the BBC News, and some people might...
Well, people want to sit back but maybe watch... They haven't literally picked this story, but it's the bulletin that is curated for them because of their
they want somebody to do the work for them.
Exactly. They're going to want the convenience of something that comes at them, but with more selectability.
But it might be personalised to them based on the information.
That's true. On our platform, we've launched it, so we've got all these bits. It's YouTube for financial professionals, and then we've also got something called Channel One, which is a linear experience. So if you're a trader or something and you want to have content flowing at you, you can have it. So yeah, I suppose offering both is
I think what that does for continuous news, though, is quite interesting in terms of is it only for the kind of the sort of chilly miners emerge moments that you want that? If you've got the ability to be able to get the best of Sky News's a 10-minute version, and you don't have to have the waffle, and you don't have to have the breaks and things like that, and you could just press a button and it's always there, would you want that, and what does that do to continuous news? Which there are definitely moments where you're still going to want it, but what kind of resource do you put into that when that becomes widely available for people?
Can I have Kay Burley's outtakes? But what about the shared moment, though? Because there is, I mean, people in television more broadly have predicted the end of linear television for about the last 10 years, but linear television hasn't died, it's just changed, hasn't it? So you have bigger, more shared experiences. X Factor, on Saturday night, everyone wants to watch it at the same time because it's all over Twitter at the same time.
We're trying to do that with Channel 4 News, which is why we're doing the live blog, because you've got this issue that lots of people were actually watching Channel 4 News +1, so they're watching at 8 o'clock, or they're watching it on the website, and they weren't taking part in that experience. So that's why we're live blogging it now, to actually, whether it works or not, well, I'd say it does work because it's trending every day in Twitter, in the UK, and often globally, the C4 News hashtag. And we're doing that specifically because we want to turn news into a live event and our programme, so that, knowing that John or Christian is actually looking at what's going on there. So you've got the politician that you're interviewing, the cabinet minister, and that becomes a live team moment, just like X Factor does when Simon, whoever, votes someone off. You can try and do that in news. It can sort of work, but I'm not sure it's going to work for the 24-hour channel.
See, I think it's ironic that it was newspapers wanted to stop television news because they thought it was going to be the death of them in the 50s. And actually, what's been the problem for newspapers is the internet, not television. Television didn't kill off newspapers at all, but the internet has, and the reason is because the internet can deliver newspapers in a quicker, faster, cheaper, more efficient way. And similarly, in a sense, I think that potentially, if anything is going to cause problems for television bulletins, it's the internet as well. But I don't think it's going to be the death of a built bulletin, a curated bulletin, because editors, journalists still have a role.
Okay, from the floor here. Where's the microphone? There it is. Yeah.
Rather nicely timed. Paul McNamara, defence correspondent from the News of the World. I mean, it just seems like this is the golden age of news distribution, and it's not TV news, but it's how we consume news. This is very much the golden age for it. But I was wondering, how much King-Canutism do you guys actually experience in your organisations? Because in print journalism, it definitely feels like the biggest obstacle to the evolution of journalism itself are the journalists.
How much continuing? I didn't get the word.
Sorry? No, I'm not. No, but, I thought just while you were thinking, my mind was slightly wandering, which is why I wasn't quite ready for the end of your question. But talking about the news of the world made me think not about controversial things. It made me think about how you use video. And how now, every time you have a great exclusive or a top story, it's accompanied by video, which you
now have to pay to watch.
Which we will have to pay to watch quite soon. But it's interesting how. Sorry, I'm completely ignoring your question. But it's interesting how.
Thank you.
I will come back to it. But it's interesting how traditional newspaper organisations have seen the power of video to enhance.
It's the same point that Ben was just making, which is that they've understood the power of now, of live unfolding news, and I think that is a huge power. And I think you'll see, the trend is that all newspapers are trying to get into that. I'm sorry, I'm not entirely sure I completely got your question.
That's why I didn't.
You're blathering. Why don't we get you to ask it again?
How many journalists change?
What you think the biggest obstacle to change are journalists?
An awful lot of them in print journalism. The more print journalists that you meet, an awful of them are very annoyed that now they have to start worrying about video for the journalists. Anything you do, you've got to create more for, and they just want to be print journalists. You guys, Sky News with the iPhone app and all things like that are very definitely embracing it, and that it seems to be making it a golden age for news distribution.
All our journalists have had to learn how to news gather and disseminate on multi-platforms.
This is what we did. We had a day last year where we had groups of 10 correspondents or producers, and I taught them what Twitter was, and I showed them how Google News worked, and they didn't even know. Some people didn't actually know that. They thought when you asked them what's this thing, which is the big blue E on the computer, which is Internet Explorer, what's that? Google. No, they didn't even know what the internet was. And so we did that, and we spent a lot of time at the end of last year showing them about the power of Twitter. Now I think with just one exception, every single correspondent.
Which one?
I'm not going to tell you. Has embraced Twitter. And I never thought that I'd see Jon Snow. We used to have these automated tweets that would go out from his blog. I never thought I'd see him absolutely obsessed with what people are saying on Twitter. He laughed at us and we did that. But you have to actually. There was that scepticism last year when it was the end of some of our bulletins, and the big drive towards online, and we said, look, in this new world, you're not just a person on TV or making TV. You're everything else. And actually, it's really important because it's really exportable. So now I've got my followers on Twitter, and I've got my blog, and I've got my Facebook fans. And actually, if I want to go and work somewhere else, it's actually probably quite useful when I get hired. And what people have got is that it's creating a brand around the journalist.
This is really interesting. I often shout at the Today programme. I shouted at the Today programme this week because John Humphrey said, and you can see an audio slideshow on our website. Although whatever an audio slideshow is and why you would want to see it, I have no idea. But this is really interesting because it makes journalists themselves marketable, and when they realise that, they embrace it.
It's been a very big thing for us as an agency, where we've had a lot of people with just Reuters on the name of the copy, or not necessarily having a byline published. The idea of giving a journalist the opportunity to have a platform, build a vertical around a certain area of content that they cover, this has actually been quite appealing. You've had a few stalwarts who haven't made the change, but by and large, I think we are moving towards a universe where our journalists are multi-platform.
And well, when you were head of the multimedia newsroom, this was your job at the BBC, and I'm sure, and you will have encountered the same things, because it's not just in newspapers that you find the Luddites.
And I've previously fallen into the trap of talking about this slightly too loosely in the past, and in a previous talk within the BBC, I was talking about the importance of using social media as a source in exactly the way that Ben described, and within a few minutes this had been turned into a tweet which was Twitter or you're sacked. And I didn't say that, but I did say it was important to use social media as a source for everyone to be able to do that. I think people get confused between using it as a source and then using it as a distribution means, and I don't think that everyone should be doing it. I think it's about people who've got something distinctive to say or a particular a level of expertise. But what it means is that the personal brand of journalists who can succeed with that is becoming much more powerful. There was a great example recently with Christiana Amanpour, who moved from CNN to ABC News. She'd got, I don't know, at least 1 million, maybe 2 million followers from CNN having promoted that. It was a personal feed. She'd got the sign-up. She took that with her when she went to ABC News, and immediately all those people are now getting an ABC News feed. So it's an example of the individual power of a journalist who can
There's actually a really interesting debate, and it's something that we did talk about, is actually who owns the IP to that. So I specifically I'm at Benjamin Cohen. Some of my colleagues decided to go for they would be like Benjamin Cohen C4, but I wanted mine to be exportable. And there is a big question, actually, and it's something that I'm sure will be coming up, not just on the scale of Christine, but that anyone. I've gained my followers I'm going to take you with me to BBC or whatever.
Yeah. Is your log on yours or not, or your organisation's?
You started asking us in job interviews, how many followers do you have?
I think there's the other interesting.
Who follows you?
Actually, I actually think I haven't managed to accumulate very many yet, but it's going to be the Facebook fans that is potentially more important.
But there is potentially a very interesting thing where more people, or a lot of people, start getting their news primarily from Twitter.
Yeah.
They don't, rather than from the original sources. This
is a whole other frontline debate in and of itself, isn't it? Yes. Do you want to get a microphone over to the corner? Thanks. Very interesting.
I'm coming from the other end. I'm a student at City University. I've just started an MA in TV journalism, and today we had to put a programme together, the whole course, and we all got on Twitter. We tried to find stories, researching the web, and our course leader was saying, "Well, why don't you call people?" And we said, call people? Why would we talk to people? Do you think that the problem now is that people are so obsessed with just the internet and Twitter and things like that, that they've kind of forgotten the basics of journalism, that actually it's just about getting out there and talking to people?
It cuts through some of the crap, effectively. So when I need to do a case study in the old days, and it's a way, I guess, of reducing resources, we decided we were going to do a piece about Facebook getting 500 million users, and for whatever bizarre reason, we decided we were going to do it from Bristol. And we needed to have a family that everyone was on Facebook, so mum, kids, grandma, auntie. And in the old days, a producer would have spent 2 days bashing the phones of, like, I don't know how you find it, phoning around local internet groups or whatever. And actually, I just put one tweet up which said, I'm looking for families in Bristol for a case study. Do you know anyone? I got 4 numbers. I phoned them all up. I did do some journalism. I did some digging, and I wanted to make sure they're not actually stooges from Facebook. And then I went and did that. But what it does is it just cuts out some of that mess. I needed to know a number today, which is what's the market penetration of smartphones in the UK. And I could have phoned up 5 analysts, but instead I just tweeted that, and 25 seconds later, 5 analysts have tweeted back with it, and I just took an average of them, and it was all about the same. I mean, you can't do it.
I was talking the other day to a professor of journalism at a university, and he was saying that the requirements that the NCTG give to him of the syllabus that they have to teach is completely disconnected from the real world, and one of the things they have to do is teach their students how to interview. And he said this is actually not a skill that young journalists need if they work in regional newspapers these days. Interviewing is not something they really need. What they actually do most of the time is rewrite press releases.
From here.
That's
a whole other. It really is a whole other debate. So yeah.
John Quirk. I'm a motoring journalist. I just wanted to go back to this beauty of pick and choose that you guys were talking about, which seems to be a lot more prevalent in the online arena than it is on the TV platform for the time being. And obviously, as all represented different news channels, you're all competing with one another. And I just wondered, on a TV level, whether there was now an opportunity for a brand new platform to almost provide some sort of aggregated authority when there's recognised areas where we know Sky are really good at covering sport and covering news first. We know Channel 4 are better at doing those more in-depth investigative pieces. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on a television platform that could actually encompass all the news bits that are best from particular platforms, and then even I don't know. I mean, even consider. I'm sorry, but
well,
yeah,
but it's interesting. You should probably. This is a good idea.
I think Google TV to some degree is going to attempt to do that, and you're already seeing. More and more attempts to put metadata layers and analysis on top of content, and I think that's a good thing. Again, you can go and build a channel that's really relevant for you, and then you could also say, I want the best or the most trended on sport, the most trended on politics, and come up with a mix of ITV, BBC, or CBS content. I think there's a lot of work to do there. For us, we use a semantic system called Open Calais, which we're trying to kind of promote and push out to lots of publishers so that the content's easily accessible, but there's no kind of common standard there at all at this stage, and I think you do need better technology to deliver that. I think Google TV will be really interesting to see how it works that way.
All right. Let's kind of try and bring it back to where we started. We've got 5 or 6 minutes left. Peter, we've talked about various definitions of golden ages, and I think we've sort of come to a general view that it's a golden age distribution, but we're not absolutely convinced that it's a golden age of television journalism. Give us a bit of futurology. Very interesting moment this week happened when the BBC, Channel 4, newspaper groups all came together to sign a letter expressing concern about media plurality in Britain and the Murdochization of television, of broadcast and print media. Is the Berlusconi moment coming to Britain? Do you see that developing?
I think there's a danger of that, but the technology trends that we've been talking about clearly potentially take us in a different direction, where there's a huge diversity as well, and it depends on which platforms you're talking about or where that kind of concentration of power is most felt. I mean, picking up the thread of what we were talking about in the last bit, I think what becomes really interesting is what's the quality and the defining characteristic of the news that each of these different organisations produces, or that amateurs produce. Is the thing that people look for, the great packaging and the graphics of Sky? Is it the more sober approach of the BBC? Is it that people just want to have a huge variety and they'd like to have it from lots of different sources? And once those technologies are there and in effect create a largely free market in ideas and content, then we'll understand better what audiences really want from news. So I think that is, in many ways, the most exciting thing, that ability to be able to serve what audiences are looking for becomes more direct, becomes more understandable by the producer, and that puts us all on our mettle, because competition is a good thing. That's why when we were talking about ITV earlier, that matters, because we're losing it within one particular sector. So I'm hopeful that will be a good trend for all of us.
But does it mean, though, Ben, that we end up with a race for the bottom, and that the kind of journalism that Tom did and the kind of journalism that David Sells did on Newsnight, that is the age, that's from the past, and we're not going to see it in the future?
I don't know. Well, I hope I'm doing some of that occasionally. I think that you've still got. I'm obviously a big advocate for technology, and I think that IPTV and Facebook in particular, which we haven't really talked about, is going to. I have, but no one else has addressed it, which is.
That's all right. We've addressed it.
But it's really important. But there is still the BBC, there is still Channel 4 with a big commitment to news, and much as Sky, of course, and as much as you criticise ITV. They are still investing money in something that is not providing a huge commercial return with regional news. They're doing that out of licensing requirements, but also now giving the indication they'll carry on doing that even when they're not forced to do it out of some PSB value. So I think that I don't know. Is my basic on this answer. I think that technology and all these sorts of things are going to change the agenda, but I still think that, strip it down, a few million people still watch the big news bulletins every night. I still tune in to the beginning of Newsnight every night just to see if there's some amazing Michael Crick story that is going to catch my eye. And people still tune into Channel 4 News to see a really good story. And so I think there is still an audience there. It's different. It's not as huge as it used to be when I was growing up, or when you guys were first working. But it's still there, and there is still that there's still that great quality, and I still think here in Britain much better quality than I see elsewhere.
Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I think the things we see or I see are probably publishers, broadcasters, who I think are the same thing almost now, getting focused on their area of expertise more and more, and that people will turn to those people for certain kinds of expertise going forward, and the ability to search across all that content, it's really relevant. People will probably pick and choose what they want to see and make sure that it's relevant for them. I think that to lament, I love long-form, high-quality journalism that I've seen on CBS and BBC Today. I'm not sure though if that's it, right? I mean, if you think about all the other content we have coming at us all the time, think about, you know, one story on an evening bulletin that you see, and think about the richness that you now have in your day-to-day life, and perhaps, you know, there's not such a huge loss if we don't have as much long format, in-depth journalism. Perhaps it's replaced by or supplanted by something else.
But maybe it's replaced by analysis,
which is rich.
Analysis pieces, which is maybe, you know, is an area for news to move towards, as we already know what the news is.
Think about long-form journalism as part of technology as well, right? I mean, it developed out of the broadcast television technology that existed. It replaced, you know, in-depth newspaper writing or magazine writing. The next stage is about, you know, sourcing a large amount of content, whether it's something you've generated yourself or something from a third party. I'm not sure that's going to be, it's not the same. It's not like reading The New Yorker or watching 60 Minutes, but it might not be of less quality. It might be richer even.
And are you an optimist?
Very optimistic. Yeah, I mean, I really am. I mean, I think I think there's a huge future for television news, and you know, we wouldn't be investing the amounts of money that we are, but not just in, you know, going into high definition, but in studios, foreign coverage, if we didn't believe that. I think in terms of where other platforms are going, I think the most exciting thing is the development of mobile, and I think that's something we haven't really talked about. But you know, the fact is that in a year or so, more and more people are going to be getting their news from mobile devices, either, you know, from the mobile web or from apps. And I think you'll see fewer people getting their news from PCs. So I think that the big focus for young journalists, if you like, should be about developing ways of telling stories on mobile devices which are attractive, interesting, entertaining, informative. You know, if I was starting out now, the sort of things I'd be thinking about are, how can I make interactive graphics that work well on an iPad? That's, you know, if you can figure out ways of doing that really successfully, you know, fantastic future.
Maybe coming soon, like the app, Benjamin Cohen iPad app.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Look out for that. Thank you very much for you coming. It's late. Thank you very much to our excellent panel. I'm sure you agree. Peter Horrocks, Benjamin Cohen, Greg Beitchman, and Simon Bucks.